Hello, I'm Rob Gotti of the Westwood Select Board, welcoming you to the Lowdown, a series designed to help demystify local town government, increase civic engagement, and encourage broader participation. In my time on the Select Board, I've been presented with, or sometimes confronted with, arguments that were based on incomplete information or misunderstanding. No one's to blame for that. People lead busy lives with limited bandwidth for diving deep into issues, and so sometimes ask questions out of frustration that may or may not be completely informed. I've always engaged these folks with the goal of helping lower tensions by increasing understanding. In mid-December, I was asked to be a guest speaker for a Westwood High School class called Civic Action. A group of roughly 30 high school juniors were really engaged and asked some great questions. I thoroughly enjoyed the day, and as I reflected on the experience, it dawned on me that the types of questions I get regularly might be a great foundation for a mini-series that could help scale collective understanding across our community. That's the purpose of the Lowdown. I will try to present things in a way that help explain them in a simple, straightforward way without bias. Any opinions, whether expressed or perceived, are solely my own. They're not meant to convey any opinions of my Select Board colleagues nor the town administration at large. Today's topic, it's just math. So let's jump in and get the lowdown. Recently, I've had a lot of folks who were pretty fired up after opening their most recent property tax bills. I get it. My wife told me she took a pretty big inhale when opening ours. A natural inclination is to get angry at the town and all the irresponsible, out-of-control spending. But let's dig into that a little further, shall we? Remember that as a town, we're governed by Prop 2.5, which means we can't increase our total tax levy by more than 2.5% plus new growth and anything else we as a community vote at annual town meeting. Now, if you haven't watched episode 1 regarding our form of government here in Westwood, I suggest you do, as it will add even greater context to what I'm going to cover next. So what does our annual town budget provide for? It provides for the essential services residents come to expect in a community like Westwood. Public safety, our police and our fire department. Education, our teachers and administrators. Public works, who help maintain our roads, keep them plowed in the wintertime, and maintain our facilities. And human services, which benefit youth, families, and seniors. And of course, general government administration. Roughly 80% of the costs associated with these services are people. Most of you would agree that these dedicated men and women deserve fair compensation and reasonable annual increases. The vast majority of this 80% of the budget are covered under collective bargaining agreements that typically run in 3-year terms. This means that a good portion of the budget, around 65%, is already baked each year before we begin the budget process. These are commitments we must meet. The only way to cut these costs are to cut people and reduce service levels. We're also mandated by state law to submit a balanced budget. We can't spend more than we take in. We simply cannot run a deficit like the federal government. Our total annual budget is comprised of 2 main expense categories: operating expenses, people, and the supplies they need to do their jobs, and capital, mostly buildings, equipment, and land. In addition to Prop 2.5 and the state requirement for a balanced budget, we also have town financial policies designed to ensure our town is run in a fiscally responsible manner. Policies that govern things like maintenance of proper reserves, think savings accounts, use of free cash, limits on debt levels, investments in capital like our equipment and our buildings. So back to this year's tax bill. First, let's remember, we're bound by Prop 2.5, which means we can only increase our total tax levy by 2.5% plus new growth and anything else that we as a community vote. We always estimate new growth conservatively so that we never fall short and need to make mid-year cuts. So based on that math, 2.5% plus 0.5% for new growth and 5% for that newly approved Pine Hill School. So that equals 8% as a rise over last year's tax bill. But wait, you say, our tax bills increased by roughly 12% and not 8%. Why? What accounts for that difference? Well, that's a fair question. Here in Westwood, we have a benefit which is called a split tax rate. So what is that and why do I say it's a benefit? Simply put, we charge commercial properties a different and higher rate than residential properties. Each year, the Select Board votes on a tax shift factor. That is, we shift the burden onto commercial businesses, which provides some relief to residents. I'll explain more on that in a minute. In fiscal year 23, residential values accounted for about 85% of the assessed values in town, and commercial equated to about 15% of the property value in Westwood. As everyone knows, after the pandemic, we saw inflation rise, and the Federal Reserve responded by increasing interest rates to combat inflation. This led mortgage rates to increase faster than they had in 40 years. This translates into more folks choosing to stay put in their homes, so supply of homes for sale tightens. The pandemic also had people rethinking living in cities. Between that and the quality of our community, demand for housing remains high here in Westwood. So what happens when you have high demand and low supply? Economics 101 says prices go up. We've all likely experienced a neighbor putting their house on the market for more than we imagined, only to see the home sell in a matter of days with backup offers in waiting. Now, those same economic factors have affected commercial properties in different ways. With hybrid work, demand for office space has weakened. Retail shops and eateries surrounding those office spaces are affected as well. Thus, the supply and demand factors in commercial property are weaker than in private home sales. So in fiscal year 24, residential property assessments increased 25%, while commercial values only increased 8%. This means the residential share of the pie went from 85 to 87%, and commercial dropped from about 15% to just under 13%. Now that commercial shift factor that I spoke of, it's capped at 1.75. It can range anywhere from 1 to 1.75. If it's 1, it would mean the tax rate is dollar for dollar equal between the commercial and residential. In fiscal year 23, last year, the Select Board approved a tax shift of 1.7, which means that the commercial share of the pie, which was 15%, was multiplied by 1.7 to equal roughly 25%. This means that even though commercial property only accounts for 15% of the assessed values in town, they end up picking up roughly 25% of the tax bill, while residential properties, which account for about 85% of the total property value in town, end up only paying about 75% of the total tax bill. Thus, commercial provides some relief for homeowners. This year, in fiscal year 24, the Select Board increased that tax shift to 1.72. However, due to the values rising 3 times faster in residential than in commercial, this means there was a shift in the pie that accounts for that extra 4% in your residential tax bills. Here's the math to explain this. Commercial property value is roughly 13% of the total assessed value. You multiply that by 1.72, the tax shift factor, and you get roughly a little bit more than 21%. Residential property value is at 87%. So to get to the residential share of the tax bill, you take the total tax bill of 100%, you subtract out that 21.2%, and that equals roughly 78.8%, which is the residential share of the pie, which is roughly 4% higher than what it was in fiscal year 23. Assessment valuation procedures are mandated and highly prescribed by the state. The town assessor and the Board of Assessors don't have a lot of discretion. The rise in assessed value of residential and commercial properties, those are driven by market data for the prior calendar year. While it doesn't ease the reality of opening your tax bill, I hope this explanation of the math helps provide greater understanding and clarity. I also hope this highlights the importance of new commercial growth as we look to the future, because new commercial growth is our relief valve for residents. We can only tax within the bounds of Prop 2.5 plus new growth and whatever we as a community collectively decide to invest in. Thanks for watching. I hope you found today's Lowdown helpful in understanding more about how things work here in Westwood. See you next time. Have a great day.